Hey everyone, welcome to the Redefining Work podcast. I'm your host, Lars Schmidt, and today we are talking talent. And not just talent, we always talk about talent, but we're talking about talent through the lens of a venture capital talent partner. I'm joined by Laurie Tennant. She is the principal of the People Advisory at Norwest Venture Partners, and we are going to dig into what it is like to do that job in this complex environment that we're operating in today. So, Laurie, the floor is yours. I'd love to have you just open with an introduction for the audience.
Great. Thanks, Sue. Thanks so much. Good to be here. I have been with Norwest Venture Partners for about 10 years. I was hired to both oversee our internal HR process as well as work with our portfolio companies and founders and HR leaders on kind of what we call HR advisory or people advisory. And we have about 200 active portfolio companies right now in our portfolio. We're multi-stage, everything from seed through Series D through growth equity. We're multi-sector, so we're consumer, technology, and healthcare, and global, multi-geographies, as really everyone is these days, right? So we have not only companies headquartered in the US, India, and Israel mostly, but of course they have employees all over the world. So that's my role. It's a super fun one. I love the combination of being able to, nurture and grow a company, our firm of 150 global employees, as well as all of the interesting things and challenges that come up with our portfolio companies.
Yeah. Well, it's quite a scope, if you will, of kind of oversight of what you do. And, I think we have seen a trend over the last couple of years of people moving from HR leader roles kind of in corporate organizations into talent partner, talent advisor, talent lead roles in venture capital firms. And so maybe for the audience who might be thinking about making that journey themselves, what does your typical week look like? What can they expect to be doing if they are in a role like yours?
Yeah, I think that probably the most important thing that I do with our portfolio leaders is connect them. So I spend a lot of time building community. We have a really robust online community. The most active of all of our online communities in our portfolio services function, because HR people love to help each other. We do roundtables, usually monthly, bringing people leaders together, talking about common challenges, and then a lot of kind of bespoke connecting of people or just advising on, challenges that people are having. Also, oversight of a rich and growing and scaling venture firm is quite challenging as well. So I think like all HR leaders during these times, it's been a very stimulating, is the word I like to use instead of stressful. It's been a very stimulating few years and interesting.
Yeah. Well, let's unpack that a bit more. Like when you think about the skills needed to thrive in a role like yours, because it is so multifaceted, right? You're not just doing one thing, and you're not just doing one thing for one company or one team. You're doing many things compounded by many different companies across different sizes and geographies and industries. What skills do you most lean on in your work? Maybe even outside of like the HR acumen that I imagine you have to have, right? What are the skills that allow you to be successful?
I've been consulting pretty much my entire career. So I think consulting skills, which means, good listening skills, good problem solving skills, good facilitation skills, and the ability to kind of maybe pattern recognition across different companies, different firms to help kind of advise and guide on common challenges. I think that's probably the most, strict kind of skill that I've had. And then in terms of experience, I've had a lot of experience with startups, which is different, especially tech startups here in the Bay Area, different than I think a lot of other types of companies. So kind of understanding the unique challenges of bringing best practices to companies that are starting out and trying to do a lot with a little.
Yeah. I'd love to get your perspective on something. We've seen, obviously, we've all been navigating a tumultuous economy, to say the least. but it's been such an interesting and difficult time, I think, particularly in tech, where it wasn't that long ago that we were all working through a period that a lot of people called the Great Resignation, the Great Reawakening, whatever you want to euphemism you want to use. But the hiring market was on fire. You couldn't hire people fast enough in any role, and then obviously very quickly that that flipped, and we entered a down period, and so we saw tremendous amounts of layoffs in tech, not just limited to tech, but certainly I think tech is what bore the brunt of a lot of these reductions. And I think looking back, it seemed like a lot of them were based on, kind of in the boom time of the market, companies really just hiring, right? Is that kind of, velocity around hiring and bringing in as many people as you can to try to build. And in that, frankly, overhiring. And so now when the market has a correction and even has a downturn, you saw a lot of companies, especially in tech, have multiple rounds of layoffs as they had to right size their headcount for this new economic reality that we operated in. And I'm curious, like I know you have a role where you get to interface with lots of different both founders and investors and people. So you kind of have this like 360 view of what it's like to live through that. What lessons do you think we've learned from the experience and the kind of the economic shifts that we've experienced over the last 2 years?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the last, I guess it's been 3.5 years now, when the pandemic first happened, right? Crazy time, as we all know, where people were looking to HR leaders to, no one knew how do we go to a complete remote workforce? What is a pandemic? How many times do we have to tell people to wash their hands, and all sorts of things that no one knew how to do. And also, especially here in the Bay Area, health orders coming out from public health departments that were changing every week. So I think, at that time, I personally spent a lot of time with our HR leaders kind of trying to figure out how to navigate that challenge, because everyone expected the HR people somehow to know when no one else did. And then we pretty quickly moved into a situation where I was doing a lot of counseling on RIFs, how to do a RIF, how to do it well, if there's such a thing of doing as well as you can, how to do it. And so what was interesting in this second downturn that started a year and a half ago, hard to keep track of time anymore, I was surprised how few conversations I had to have about how to do a RIF, which is, good news, bad news, right? Most of the HR leaders by that point had been through a RIF and knew kind of how to do it. What we were concerned with, I think, as a venture firm supporting our companies was, how to get them to make the kind of tough decisions where they could, when they've been in a huge growth mode, right? How to help them make the kind of decisions where they would be able to sustain a couple of years potentially without raising additional capital, which seemed like a long horizon at the time, but now of course that's come to pass. So I think that companies were less reluctant to make the kind of cuts they need to. Some of them still not deep enough. I think at this point, I feel like hopefully 2024 will be better, but I feel like we're all kind of in this we kind of need to sustain where we are right now. Hiring, most of our companies are kind of flat right now. Some of them starting to hire, but pretty much staying flat and not having difficulties hiring anymore. One thing that I think has been really interesting, there's an article in the Wall Street Journal probably 2 weeks ago now that talked about how people aren't resigning as much. So the non-regrettable attrition rates are down to the point where companies need to be more aggressive in their performance management and make sure that they're, able to prune enough to continue to bring in new talent. So, so you asked kind of what lessons have been learned. I think that our founders and CEOs are just much less quick to react to things like what seems like a shortage in talent. I think we're all just kind of more, conservative, steady state. Let's not react too quickly to and no longer kind of growth at all costs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think it's been interesting to see some of the numbers of layoffs, declining steadily over the last couple of months, and then they seem to be holding steady at a much lower rate than they had been over the last 18 months. So hopefully that trend continues, and we can go into 2024 with a cautious sense of hope and optimism that we've moved up from
Turn
the
the
bottom,
corner.
and we're rebounding.
Yeah.
For companies that aren't, you wrote a piece in Norwest blog about compassionate rifts and layoffs, and I'd love to have you expand on that a little bit, because I think certainly at this stage in the current kind of down cycle that we're in, we've seen the worst of the worst cases. I mean, I don't know that there's a best case for layoffs. Layoffs suck. And especially if you're impacted by them, no amount of care is going to make you feel good about that. But there are examples of companies that were very compassionate in how they managed it, how they led it, how they communicated it, how they supported impacted employees. And so I'd love to have you just expand a bit more on that article. Like, when you think about what are the elements of a compassionate riff, what does that look like to
Mhm.
you?
Yeah, and I wrote that article just to say real quickly because I was so frustrated by the way some big tech companies were handling their risks without providing dignity to people impacted, and everyone's impacted, right? All of us who've ever been at a company that's had a riff, whether you were one of the people laid off or not, everyone is impacted. They're really rough. Um, the And then I saw a couple companies doing it really well. Stripe was a company that did it well. Airbnb was a company that did it well. And it really came down to kind of transparent communication and preparation. So if possible, and this is not always possible, nor does it make sense, a company, employees at a company going along can, are getting regular updates on how the company's doing, and maybe they're anticipating it, so it's not a shock. That's ideal, but that's not always the case, right? But first of all, primarily treat people with respect on the way out, and then secondly, just communication, to take the time to communicate with people ahead of time if possible. The playbook that I usually recommend is, if possible, you bring people together or send out a communication right before the action happens. You let people know this is the time frame. You may or may not get an invite. You conduct the meetings as respectfully and quickly as possible. Bring the company together afterwards. Explain that what has happened and why, who's impacted, so it's not a big mystery. The rationale for why it had to happen and how it positions the company going forward. Everyone has the same message. Everyone gives the same message, and then you open Q&A, which at that point, and then maybe a couple days later, another open Q&A with the C-suite or by department, so people have lots of opportunity to ask questions. By contrast, what we saw from companies like Google and Twitter was, people coming in and their badge doesn't work, and then they find out, and there's just no reason to do that, right? It takes more time, takes more preparation, but there's no reason to treat people that way, and the ramifications are. It's rough. It's rough. It's rough if you're impacted. It feels personal, even though it's not, or it sort of is. It's really hard to watch your, people go, and it's with just a few tweaks, it's relatively easy to have a different approach.
Yeah, no, you're right. I remember the Twitter ones were particularly painful. I mean, I would say the Google ones were maybe more painful because you wouldn't expect kind of the Google ones to go the way they had. I think Twitter under that current management maybe was less surprising, but still painful. And I think like the challenge is, this is a very emotional experience. And you mentioned Stripe and Airbnb as companies that got it right. Like I actually in my book Redefining HR, I spotlighted Brian Chesky's email to employees when they had their layoffs just after the pandemic as just a masterclass in how to do an empathetic riff, and he owned it. They kind of explained it, and there's just that to me that was a masterclass in how to do that right. I want to
Absolutely.
I want to shift gears with you for a moment because I think obviously we've lived through a lot of changes in the world of work over the last couple of years, and certainly that's had a pretty profound impact on our world of HR and people, and certainly on the head of people, the chief people officer, the CHRO, whatever the title might be. This is probably one of the most complex roles in the C-suite today. And I would love to get your thoughts. Obviously, you're advising different portfolio companies and founders who are hiring chief people officers or heads of people. What do you tell them to look for? Like, how do you have a portfolio founder sitting across from you. They want to really level up their HR team and their capabilities, and they're looking to you for guidance on what they should be looking for. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I think there's really specific skills needed to scale a company, right? To go from a startup type environment to a larger company, maybe even approaching IPO. So great if you can find someone who's done it before, who's seen the movie before. Actually, the oftentimes people will say we want someone who's sat in the seat with an IPO before, and the IPO itself and IPO prep is not actually that critical for a people leader as much as I think being able to scale a company and knowing when to, when it's going to start, when you need to deal with the stresses on the systems and the processes and the people when you're scaling. So ideally someone who's scaled before. And one of the things that I've noticed among our people leaders who are super successful is someone who's worked at a large company before, perhaps a Deloitte, or we had someone who really successful people leader who came from 20 years at HP before, right? Someone who's kind of seen best practices and the frameworks, but also knows how to translate it to a startup environment, and knows what will transfer to a small startup environment, what modifications they need to make, and then how to kind of point the North Star towards a larger scaling company. So that I think is super critical. And then also someone who has the ability to think strategically, can partner with the rest of the C-suite and around all the people issues and growth issues, but is also willing to kind of dig in and get their hands dirty. We have such a unique, talented community of people leaders that I work with quite frequently in our portfolio, who are skilled strategically and also willing to be an HR department of one, or maybe an HR department of two, and run payroll if they have to, or design the new performance management system, do individual coaching with employees in the company. So I think those are the two things. One is the ability to scale from a startup to a larger company. And then the willingness, I guess, to be strategic and hands-on at the same time. Yeah. And it's people who are often in HR department of one. I don't know have you ever been in HR department of one yourself, or two maybe?
I haven't HR recruiting, yes,
Yes.
But I have in the Amplified Talent community, we have a lot of HR departments of one, or very, very lean departments. So that role is strategic, it's tactical, it's hands-on, it's forecasting, it's all of it.
Yeah, and it's super fun. If I feel like I was in HR department of one for many years here at Norwest, and it's fun to be able to do all of that. But it can also be a really lonely job, because there are things that you are knowing about and learning about that you can't talk to anyone. Maybe you can talk to the CEO about, but no one else. And that's, I think, been one of the biggest values for the leaders in our portfolio, is being able to come together and share in a safe space in the family, that kind of issues that come up that they can't talk to. They talk to maybe their spouse about, but no one else.
Yeah, I mean as you mentioned, that community piece is critical. Like you can't be a high impact people leader today without a network, without a deep network and people that that are your phone a friend network, your commiserate network sometimes because this work is hard. It's lonely, it's challenging. And you're right. Like there's a lot of things that you can't talk to anybody about. There's some things you can't talk to your CEO about because it might be about your CEO.
Right.
And
Oh
so,
my gosh. Yeah.
you have to have those
Yeah.
peer
Yeah.
networks that are like can talk you
Yeah.
off the ledge sometimes when you need that.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your perspective on one thing. I think we are seeing a lot of, especially in tech, experienced senior leaders stepping out. Right, maybe moving into coaching, moving into consulting, taking a sabbatical, but we're starting to see a bit of a talent drain at the upper echelon of the field. And so you're seeing more people getting those kind of stretch assignments into first time heads of people role. Um, how do you manage that? Like you mentioned, obviously you've got a robust community to support portfolio leaders. How else do you think about supporting leaders where they may need to get somebody in that role that hasn't seen and done all the things that they're going to see and do, and they're going to be experiencing that for the first time?
Yeah, HR people are so nice and so wonderful and usually so willing to share their expertise and talents. And
Yeah.
we had a situation where very talented, more junior person, but again, very, very talented. She's been a super active member of our community. Her CEO was looking, wanted to continue to up-level her by pairing her with someone who's seen the movie before, right? So I reached out to some of the more senior leaders in our portfolio and was amazed. There were half a dozen, again, super experienced, talented HR leaders who reached out and said they're passionate about mentoring. So I connected her with 3 other people who are willing to spend a half an hour a week with her, just kind of talking through the kind of challenges that she's facing, that you just need someone who's kind of seen the movie before. So I think that kind of mentor pairing can be super effective.
Yeah. Let's we had to look back. Let's take a look ahead, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna ask you to make predictions because who can even think about making those anymore? But like when you
Right.
think about the current kind of zeitgeist around talent people trends, like a shift towards returning to the office, more so than remote. Talking about budget cuts that are hitting programs like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, or workplace flexibility, or this pushback we're seeing in some organizations around what they perceive to be employee entitlement, in certain areas. And obviously, you get to think about these things at scale because you're looking at across a global portfolio. Without obviously getting into any specifics of any organization, like what trends are you seeing? Like what are some of the things that tend to be kind of top of mind for the people leaders in your portfolio?
Yeah, a few things. I think the return to office is an evergreen topic on all of our monthly roundtables, and it's interesting because I don't think I could say there's one particular trend among these companies. We have companies who were fully remote before the pandemic and are happy to do that. Companies who went fully remote because they gave up their space and are staying fully remote and feel like it's the best thing ever. Largely because of the talent that they can hire from any pool is a large part of it. And then companies increasingly where there's pressure from the C-suite to bring people back, right? And that's challenging for a few reasons. One is you've already let people move all over the place. So the messaging that we tend to talk about why it's important is really excludes all the people that you've told that they could move remote, right? Or hired remote. So you really have to be careful about the messaging around why you want people to come back. And then talent also. We have one company who's in a small town or medium-sized town in the Midwest, and it has severely impacted their hiring all of a sudden because the pools are so much smaller, especially for engineering talent. So, and from the company side, I get it. I myself work 3 days a week in the office, 2 days a week at home. Love both aspects of it. Every time I'm in the office, every time I have a conversation that I wouldn't, and this has been going on for the year and a half that we've been back, that I have a conversation that I would not have had if I wasn't in the office every single time. And it's always a conversation that's valuable. So I think collaboration, super important and really impacted by having people co-located, and innovation as well. So, for companies, I think the benefit of having people remote is recruiting and real estate costs, but the trade-offs are, I think they're trade-offs, and I think that that's increasingly going to be the trend, I think. Not to predict, but I think.
Yeah.
So,
I won't hold you to that, right? We won't
right.
we won't card that word. I think the environment we're in, the volatility that we're experiencing, I would love to tell, the redefiners tuning in that it's a moment in time and we're going to turn the page on that. I'm an optimist, and I don't think that. I think we're going to continue to be in an environment that is largely has a lot of volatility, and it's more of how do we adapt to that? How do we navigate to these changes that are taking place? And how do we get ahead of it? Right? Like we can talk about, generative AI or these new kind of technologies or platforms that will be changing everything, right? And that's, I think, from an HR perspective, like it's important that the demands of our job are vast and complex and challenging, and it's natural for that to kind of pull your head into your desk and just look at what's in front of you, but you can't. You've got to be able to lift your head up, and you've got to be able to look at some of these things that are coming, because that is our reality. And if we're not baking that into our process, we're not going to be able to help see the whole picture and advise our leaders and our companies accordingly.
Yeah, and it's another example. I think AI is another example. I think for AI, companies are looking to technology as well as HR to figure out, but it's another example of just like this brand new thing that's come on the horizon. And HR people, how do we deal with it? I don't know. I can figure it out, but I don't know, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, and to be honest, like there is no answer, right? There's,
Right.
we're recording this a week after OpenAI released GPTs.
Yeah.
And this is massive for our industry. And it democratizes the access to these powerful tools for practitioners to become creators and build HR tools that are super valuable. But it also allows a random person off the street to create what they call as an HR tool that's not programmed in any way to be valuable. And now if you're using the wrong tool, you're going to get bad information. So we have to be savvy consumers, but we will only even know that that's a problem we need to be thinking about if we're paying a bit of attention. It's just, it's complex, and I get it. But I think to me, it's like I kind of frame there's two key things for success as a HR leader today: your learning agility and your network equity. And if you're looking at building both of those things as part of your job, not something in addition to your job, you're going to be successful and you're going to make space for it, because to be impactful in your role, you have to be. And, it's exciting times, it's dynamic times, it's challenging times, but this is the world that we're in today. So,
Yeah.
Laurie, final thoughts on your end. If there's practitioners out there who, would love to get your perspective on kind of where the world of work is heading, what would you share with them? What gets you excited when you think about what's next?
Can I answer one other question that I was thinking, about what's really big on our HR leaders' minds as well as return to office, because it's super important is mental health.
Yes.
That's the other topic that's evergreen in our roundtables. That as soon as you mention mental health, like on a Zoom call where you have 20 faces, everyone nods their head. That has been a significant change in the last few years in a few ways. I think the pandemic obviously probably created some mental health issues for people, exacerbated mental health issues for people. The expectation that your employer would be responsible for your mental health, I think, is something that's new, and that shows up with kind of old school managers like me, who've been around a while, who grew up in a time when there was a strict separation. You would never think about bringing any personal issues from home into the office, right? And I think that changed for everybody, especially here. Look at us; we're in our homes right now. So that as the lines blurred, I think that expectation was created. So, our leaders have had to teach their managers how to deal with employee mental health issues that come up, how to talk to people about it, what to do when someone raises an issue that really needs probably elevated HR attention. And even the expectations on HR leaders we've had several who end up sitting down with probably more of their younger employees and helping them find a therapist on the benefits website. So I think so it's not only issues kind of created in the pandemic, but I think issues with people coming back has been pretty significant also. And I don't know any HR leader who, again, doesn't nod their head. Lots of issues, employee relations issues that we never saw before at a greater frequency. So what made me think about that is when you're saying, learning agility and network equity and all the ways we have to kind of be thinking ahead to be able to do our jobs and be effective, we're also dealing with a lot of things on a personal employee by employee level that take significant amount of time. So you have to have a good team and be able to balance all of it. So another way where I think HR leaders have been able to, prove their worth in the C-suite when you have a really kind of, wacky-ish employee relations issue that shows up and everyone looks once again to the HR person to figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate raising that point because I think it is important, and I think that the last comment you made around like HR has to figure it out. I mean, that's like. I lovingly refer to our field as the Department of Plus One over the last couple of years, because whether it's like crisis communications, pandemics, safety, health, mental, I mean, so many things that were not historically part of our world are now very much part of our world. So yeah, that ability to adapt and take that on and to do it with compassion, I think is really important. Laurie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your expertise, your journey, your wisdom with us. If Amplifiers want to connect with you after the podcast, is LinkedIn the best way to do that? Yes, LinkedIn's the best way to do that. I'm not on Twitter anymore. Okay. As a matter of principle. So, that's fair. That's fair. So, all right. LinkedIn, you heard it here. Laurie, thanks so much for your time, and wishing you all the continued success at Norwest Venture Partners. Oh, thanks so much.